What? You still haven't subscribed? Smash that subscribe button and get on the best informative videos you're missing.
August 6, 1945, a warm summer morning in Japan's Hiroshima city was buzzed with life. The sky glowed blue and the sun shone brightly. It was a regular Monday. By 8 a.m., workers settled into their offices, and children sat in classrooms starting their first lessons. High above, a few people noticed an American plane, a Boeing B-29, gliding through the sky. No one thought much of it at first, but at 8:15 a.m., something dropped from the plane. From the ground, it was hard to tell what it was, just a speck falling through the air. No one could have guessed it was an atomic bomb. For 43 seconds, it fell. Then, in a single moment, everything changed. A dazzling light flashed, blinding and fierce. A massive fireball erupted, like the sun itself had crashed to Earth. The heat soared to 4,000 degrees Celsius. In that instant, 80,000 lives were lost. Why did this happen? What led to such a devastating moment? Let's dive into the story of the atomic bombs dropped on Hiroshima and Nagasaki to understand the reasons behind it. Our tale starts in the midst of a great conflict called the Second World War, which sparked in 1939 when a man named Hitler sent his armies into Poland. Like a wildfire, the war spread, pulling in country after country. Two big groups faced off in this war. On one side stood the Axis powers, Germany, led by Hitler, alongside Italy and Japan. On the other side were the Allied powers, or simply the Allies, which included Great Britain, the Soviet Union, and the United States. Other nations like France and China also joined the Allies. At first, the United States wanted no part in this fight. After the terrible losses of the First World War, America decided to stay out of troubles in Europe and Asia. They hoped to keep the peace at home. But in 1941, everything changed. Japan launched a surprise attack on Pearl Harbor, a U.S. naval base. This bold move forced America to jump into the war, ready or not. To understand this story, we need to look at Japan's side of things. When people talk about World War II, they often focus on Germany and Hitler. But Japan's role is just as important. Back in the early 1900s, Japan was caught up in something called imperialism. Like Britain, France, and other European nations that took over other lands to build their empires, Japan was doing the same. By 1940, Japan had taken control of places like Indonesia, Myanmar, Cambodia, Vietnam, parts of eastern China, North Korea, South Korea, and Laos. These lands made up the Japanese Empire. Japan's leaders spoke of a dream called Greater Asia, United Asia under their rule. But in truth, like other colonizers, they wanted these lands for their own gain, to take resources and grow their power. Japan's big push began in 1931 when they seized Manchuria, a region in northern China. They didn't stop there. They set their sights on more land, like parts of Mongolia controlled by the Soviet Union, and southern areas like Vietnam, Laos, and Cambodia. But there was a catch. Vietnam and Cambodia were part of the French Empire, called French Indochina. To take these lands, Japan had to challenge France. In 1940, Japan did just that. They declared war on France and captured those southern territories. But this choice pulled Japan into the heart of World War II. While Hitler was waging wars and taking over countries in Europe, Japan was doing the same in Asia, building its empire step by step. America watched Japan's growing empire, but still wanted to stay out of the war's fighting. Instead of sending soldiers, they tried to slow Japan down with economic moves. They stopped sending Japan key materials like copper, iron, and steel, hoping it would halt their expansion. But Japan kept pushing forward. So America took a bigger step. They cut off oil exports to Japan. Back then, oil was like lifeblood for Japan, and 80% of it came from America. The US gave Japan a choice: leave the Chinese lands they'd taken and break ties with Germany and Italy, or no more oil. For Japan, this was a tough call. Giving in meant abandoning their dream of a greater Asia under their control. The Japanese emperor wasn't ready to let that dream die. Instead of backing down, Japan looked elsewhere for oil. They set their sights on Malaysia and Indonesia, lands rich with oil and resources. But there was a problem. Indonesia was called the Dutch East Indies, controlled by the Dutch, and Malaysia was British Malaya under British rule. Both the Dutch and British were America's allies. Attacking those lands could pull America into the fight to defend them. Then there was the Philippines, an American territory at the time, also on Japan's list. Taking the Philippines would definitely provoke America. Japan knew their dream of a greater Asia needed these lands, but America's strength was far greater. A long war would likely end in Japan's defeat. So Japan hatched a bold plan. They decided to strike first, aiming to weaken America before it could fight back. If they could sneak attack America's military bases, destroy their fighter planes and ships, Japan believed America would be too crippled to stop them. It was a risky move, but Japan saw it as their only path to keep their dream alive. On December 7, 1941, Japan made a daring move. They launched a surprise attack on Pearl Harbor, a U.S. naval base. Over 350 Japanese Navy planes swooped in, bombing the harbor. In just 2 hours, they sank 19 U.S. ships, destroyed 188 military planes, and took the lives of more than 2,000 American soldiers. Right after, Japan moved quickly and seized the Philippines, an American territory. But this was a bold and risky choice, almost like a child's thinking. Hit someone first, take their land, and assume they won't fight back because they said they'd stay out of the war. Of course, attacking a powerful nation like the US and capturing their territory was sure to wake them up. And it did. America didn't stay quiet. They declared war on Japan, officially jumping into World War II. Soon after, Britain and China also declared war on Japan. 3 days later, Nazi Germany and Italy, Japan's allies, declared war on the US. By the end of 1941, the world was ablaze with conflict. Every major nation was now locked in battle, and World War II was raging at full force. Let's fast forward through the war's chaos to 1943, when Italy, one of the Axis powers, gave up and surrendered. Then on April 30th, 1945, Hitler took his own life with a gunshot, and soon after, Germany surrendered too. That left Japan as the last Axis power still fighting. Even with heavy losses piling up, the Japanese Emperor Hirohito refused to give in. Now let's pause to understand what was happening in Japan. The people were under a powerful spell of belief, shaped by something called Japanese fascism. Emperor Hirohito was seen as more than a leader. He was like a god to them. People were taught that he was a divine gift, and his words were truth itself. Doubting him was unthinkable. Those who did were labeled traitors and often executed. When the emperor said colonizing other lands was for the greater good, most believed it. When Japan went to war, many thought it was a noble cause. To keep people loyal, old traditions were twisted. Take the Bushido Code, the way of the samurai. It originally taught warriors to face death bravely, without fear. But the leaders changed it, saying a true samurai's greatest honor was to die for the emperor, and surrendering was shameful. This idea sank deep into people's minds, pushing them to sacrifice everything. This led to something chilling called kamikaze. These were pilots who flew their planes straight into enemy ships, giving their lives in fiery crashes, suicide missions. Even more heartbreaking, children were trained to carry explosives and throw themselves under enemy tanks to destroy them. Can you imagine the level of control over people's minds? Not everyone was fully convinced, though. Some kamikaze pilots on the night before their missions wept and wrote letters to their families, wondering if their sacrifice was truly for Japan's good or just for the emperor's dreams. Meanwhile, the Allies, including America, noticed Japan's struggles. Unemployment was sky high, food was scarce, and people were starving. They hoped the Japanese people would rise up against their emperor and force a surrender. But the grip of loyalty and fear was too strong, and no rebellion came. America saw only one path left to end the war: a massive invasion of Japan to topple Emperor Hirohito. They called this plan Operation Downfall. But first they had to fight a major battle on the Okinawa Islands, just south of Japan, from April 1st to June 22nd, 1945. The goal was to capture these islands, clear out any resistance, and prepare for the big invasion. What happened in Okinawa stunned America. The Japanese fought with fierce determination. Every soldier, every person, seemed ready to battle until their final breath. Kamikaze pilots crashed their planes into American ships, one after another, with no sign of giving up. This made defeating the Japanese incredibly tough. The Battle of Okinawa became known as the bloodiest fight in the Pacific. In the end, America won, but the cost was staggering. They lost 12,000 soldiers, with over 50,000 injured. On the Japanese side, 110,000 soldiers died. Even worse, over 100,000 Okinawans, people who lived on the islands, lost their lives, a quarter of the island's population. These numbers shook the American leaders. They realized Operation Downfall would be far worse. If capturing one small island cost so many lives, invading all of Japan would be a nightmare. The Japanese people, driven by intense loyalty to their emperor, showed no sign of surrender. A full-scale invasion could drag on for years, with countless American and Japanese lives lost in brutal, close combat. The price of victory seemed too high to bear. America and its allies knew they needed a different way to make Japan surrender. The cost of fighting on land was too high. On April 12, 1945, President Franklin D. Roosevelt, who had led the U.S. through much of World War II, passed away. Vice President Harry Truman stepped up as the new president, and the task of ending the war with Japan fell to him. Truman looked at every option. He thought about negotiating peace with Japan's Emperor Hirohito, but the emperor had already made it clear he wouldn't surrender. Then Truman learned about a secret project called the Manhattan Project. A group of scientists had been working in the shadows to create the world's first atomic bomb. On July 16, 1945, they tested it in a remote desert in New Mexico, and it worked. Truman saw this as a possible answer. He met with his military leaders and top officials to plan how to use this powerful new weapon. But first, they decided to give Japan one final warning. On July 26, 1945, the leaders of the US, China, and Great Britain issued the Potsdam Declaration. It demanded that Japan surrender completely or face prompt and utter destruction. They didn't say what destruction meant, and the Japanese couldn't even imagine a weapon like the atomic bomb existed. By this time, many people in Japan were exhausted from the war. Food was scarce, unemployment was high, and the economy was crumbling. Anti-war feelings were growing, and some whispered about wanting peace. The emperor might have considered surrendering if he could stay in power, but the Allies demanded total surrender with no conditions. On July 29, 1945, Japan rejected the Potsdam Declaration, refusing to give in. On August 3, 1945, President Harry Truman made a heavy decision. He approved dropping an atomic bomb on Japan. 3 days later, on August 6th, a Boeing B-29 plane soared over Hiroshima. Inside it was a bomb called Little Boy, a strange name for the world's first atomic bomb used in war. At 8:15 a.m., it fell. America became the only nation ever to use a nuclear weapon. For those in Hiroshima who survived, the memory is a nightmare. They speak of a blinding light that stole their sight for a moment. Then came a deafening blast, so loud it left many unable to hear ever again. The ground burned at 4,000 degrees Celsius, turning people to ash in an instant. Some left only their shadows, burned into rocks, still visible today. Those who weren't killed right away stood in shock, unable to grasp what had happened. Then came the shock waves, followed by fierce winds, like a hurricane, hurling debris, glass, wood, everything through the air. When the winds finally settled, survivors looked up. The bright blue sky from just minutes before was gone, swallowed by thick, black, toxic clouds. 70% of Hiroshima's buildings were destroyed. The city was no longer a city, just ruins. Satellite images from before and after show the devastation. The details of the dead are too heartbreaking to describe fully, but their skin hung off and they suffered in unbearable thirst. About half an hour after the blast, rain began to fall. People hoped it would bring relief, but it was no ordinary rain. The toxic dust in the air had mixed with the clouds, and black, greasy drops fell, poisonous to the touch. In most disasters, doctors and ambulances rushed to help. But in Hiroshima, 90% of the healthcare workers were killed, and most hospitals were gone. Who could save the survivors? Many who escaped the initial blast later died, days, weeks, or months after, from radiation sickness, a silent killer left by the bomb. After the Hiroshima bombing, some hardline Japanese military leaders shrugged it off. To them, it was just another bomb. A bigger one, but not enough to make them give up. Emperor Hirohito still refused to surrender. 3 days later, on August 9, 1945, America struck again. Another Boeing B-29 flew over Nagasaki, carrying a more powerful atomic bomb called Fat Man. At around 11 a.m., it dropped, creating a massive mushroom cloud. The explosion destroyed 6.7 square kilometers of the city and killed 40,000 people instantly. Fewer died in Nagasaki than in Hiroshima, and there were reasons for that. Word of Hiroshima's destruction had spread, and pamphlets warned other cities of similar attacks. Many in Nagasaki had already fled from the city center to the outskirts. Plus, hills surrounded Nagasaki, which softened the blast's impact. Hiroshima, flat and open, had taken the full force. Together, the two bombs killed about 200,000 people, and 95% of them were ordinary civilians, not soldiers. Finally, the Japanese Supreme Council met to talk about surrender. Some were terrified, fearing America would keep bombing if they didn't stop. But others, stubborn as ever, refused to give in. When the council voted, it was a tie. 3 for surrender, 3 against. The decision fell to Emperor Hirohito. For the first time, he chose surrender. But the bombs weren't the only reason. Just hours before the Nagasaki attack, the Soviet Union declared war on Japan. They invaded Manchuria, a region in northern China that Japan had controlled. With the US bombing their cities, the Soviets attacking from the north, and growing unrest in Japan's occupied territories in Southeast Asia, the pressure was too much. Emperor Hirohito saw no other way out and agreed to end the fight. Some Japanese military leaders were furious about the surrender. They refused to accept defeat and even tried to overthrow Emperor Hirohito in a coup. But their plan failed. On August 15, 1945, Japan surrendered, and with that, World War II came to an end. For the next 7 years, until 1952, the Allies, led by the US, occupied Japan. During this time, they worked out the terms of the surrender. Japan adopted a new constitution, embraced democracy, and the emperor became figurehead, a symbol with no real power. Even today, Japan has an emperor, but he holds no authority. The destruction in Hiroshima and Nagasaki was immense, costing about $970 million. Yet rebuilding started almost right away. Volunteers from other cities poured in to help restore what was lost. The effort was so remarkable that if you visit Hiroshima or Nagasaki today, you'd hardly believe they were once devastated by atomic bombs. The cities stand beautifully rebuilt. But for those who survived the bombings, life was never the same. Radiation left many with disabilities, and their children often faced health challenges, including a higher risk of cancer. Thankfully, there was some relief. The long-term radiation in Hiroshima and Nagasaki wasn't as dangerous as feared, unlike the disaster at Chernobyl. A typhoon that hit later helped wash away some of the radiation. Plus, an atomic bomb's fallout works differently than a nuclear power plant's, causing less lasting harm to the environment. Now we come to the big question. From America's view, was it right to drop the atomic bombs and kill 200,000 people? It's not a simple question to answer, even today. President Harry Truman never said sorry for the bombings. He showed no regret, saying, "I thought it was a blessing. I wanted a weapon to win the war, and it did." He and many U.S. leaders believed the bombs were the only way to end the war. They saw two paths to stop Japan. First, Operation Downfall, the plan to invade Japan with soldiers, and second, using the atomic bombs. After the bloody Battle of Okinawa, where so many died, they feared an invasion would be worse. America estimated that fighting Japan on the ground could take 10 years and cost 1 million American lives. The Japanese seemed ready to fight to the last person, never surrendering. So they chose the bombs, believing 200,000 deaths, mostly civilians, were fewer than the million soldiers they might lose. They also said they didn't fully know the bomb's long-term effects, like radiation sickness or diseases that would harm survivors later. The Manhattan Project scientists knew the bombs released radiation, but hadn't studied what it would do to people's bodies. Critics, though, argue America had other choices. First, why bomb cities full of civilians? 95% of those killed weren't soldiers. They could have targeted a military island to scare Japan into surrendering. The US countered that Japan's military was so stubborn, even Hiroshima's bombing didn't make them quit. Why would a smaller island bombing work? Plus, America only had 2 bombs ready, with 2 more in the works, so they picked targets to make a big impact. Second, critics point out that just before the Nagasaki bombing, the Soviet Union invaded Japan's territory in Manchuria. Some say Japan would have surrendered soon anyway, facing attacks from both the US and the Soviets. They argue the second bomb at least was unnecessary. America could have waited. Some even believe the Soviet invasion, not the bombs, was the real reason Japan gave up. Finally, there's the moral question. Who gave Truman the right to decide 200,000 lives were worth less than 1 million soldiers? It's easy to make that choice from a distant office. But would he have dropped the bombs if his own family were in Hiroshima or Nagasaki? A psychologist once suggested a chilling idea. To use nuclear weapons, a president should have to personally kill a volunteer to get the codes. If sacrificing one life to save thousands makes sense, the president should face that choice directly, knife in hand. These questions linger, asking us to think deeply about the cost of such decisions. What do you think? Was America right to drop the atomic bombs on Hiroshima and Nagasaki? Was it justified, or was it a terrible mistake? This question still sparks debates today. Back in 1991, a survey asked Americans and Japanese this very question. In the US, 63% said the bombings were justified. In Japan, only 29% agreed. Notice that it's not 100% in America or 0% in Japan, because it's a tough question with no simple answer. One thing is clear, the bombings taught the world a hard lesson. The destruction was so awful that no country has used nuclear weapons since. Hopefully it stays that way. The pain and loss from those bombs show why they should never be used again. What's your take? Share your thoughts and let's keep this conversation going. I hope the story shed light on a complex moment in history